There was a time when movie theatres were not just places, they were sanctuaries of light. On cold Toronto nights, when snow danced under the street lamps of Yonge Street, one name glowed brighter than the rest, the Uptown Theatre. Its neon letters shimmered like a promise, rising above the city's heartbeat, a beacon for dreamers, lovers, and families who came seeking a glimpse of something larger than life. For more than 8 decades, the Uptown was not only a building, it was a ritual, a destination, a heartbeat of Toronto itself. Inside its golden halls, thousands sat shoulder to shoulder, waiting for the lights to dim, for that first flicker of magic to appear on the screen. The air would fill with whispers, the rustle of programs, and the scent of popcorn melting under the hum of anticipation. And then, silence. The film would begin, and for 2 hours the world outside disappeared. The Uptown didn't just show movies, it created memories. First dates, children's laughter, the shock of newsreels during war, the glamour of premieres, all of it etched into the walls like invisible photographs. But like every story ever told on its screen, this one had an ending. The crowds grew smaller, the streets quieter. And one day, the bright lights that had guided generations faded into the dusk of memory. Now what remains is not the theatre itself, but its echo, a memory that still lingers in the soul of Toronto, whispering of a time when cinema was not consumed but experienced. This is the story of the Uptown Theatre, the palace of dreams that once made Toronto shine. In 1920, Toronto was a city in motion. Streetcars rattling down Yonge Street, shop windows glowing at dusk, and a sense that modern life was finally arriving. When the Uptown Theatre opened its doors that year, it wasn't just another cinema, it was a statement. It said that Canada could dream in gold. The facade stood proud and ornate, carved with geometric lines and classical curves that caught the morning light. Inside, velvet curtains framed a stage fit for royalty. Chandeliers shimmered above 3,000 red seats, and a giant screen waited to bring distant worlds into focus. People called it a palace for the people, and that's exactly what it felt like. Audiences would arrive hours early, dressed in their best. A ticket to the Uptown wasn't just admission to a film, it was an escape from winter, from routine, from the ordinary. As the orchestra tuned its instruments and the lights dimmed, the crowd would hold its breath, then the projector would flare to life, and the theatre would become a universe of flickering stars. In those early decades, movies were still magic. Silent stories accompanied by live music, laughter echoing beneath the dome. The Uptown became the heartbeat of downtown Toronto, a gathering place where strangers shared wonder in the dark. No one in 1920 could have imagined that this magnificent theatre, born in an age of optimism, would one day stand empty and forgotten. But for now, the Uptown was alive, Toronto's proud promise that beauty and imagination still mattered. By the 1940s, the Uptown Theatre had become more than a landmark. It was a living symbol of Toronto's golden age. Outside, the city pulsed with energy. Streetcars clanged, neon lights danced across the shop fronts, and crowds lined up around the block just to catch the next big release. Inside, the Uptown glowed like a dream. Every night felt like a celebration. Soldiers home from the war brought their sweethearts to the balcony. Families filled the aisles on weekends, clutching popcorn bags and programs printed with Hollywood stars. From Casablanca to The Sound of Music, every story came alive beneath those chandeliers. And when the projector began to hum, the entire room seemed to hold its breath together. During the 1950s and 60s, the Uptown stood at the very center of Toronto's cultural identity. It hosted premieres, galas, and eventually the earliest editions of what would become the Toronto International Film Festival. To many, it wasn't just a theatre. It was the beating heart of the city's imagination. Teenagers found their first freedom there, watching films their parents wouldn't approve of. Couples shared their first kiss in the dim glow of the screen. Generations learned what joy, sorrow, and beauty looked like through the stories flickering before them. The Uptown was a mirror of its time, elegant, confident, and proud of its place in the world. Toronto was growing up, and the Uptown grew with it. It wasn't just a building anymore, it was a shared memory in progress, a place where ordinary life felt extraordinary, even if just for a couple of hours. No one thought it could ever fade. After all, how could a city lose something that felt immortal? By the 1980s, the world around the Uptown had changed. Toronto was no longer the quiet, elegant city of the post-war years. It was becoming a metropolis of speed, competition, and convenience. The streets that once filled with lines of moviegoers now filled with traffic and neon signs from chain stores. The magic that once lived in the grand movie palaces began to flicker. Multiplexes started appearing across the suburbs, sterile, efficient, and closer to home. They offered more screens, cheaper tickets, easier parking. For the first time, the Uptown size worked against it. 3,000 seats once felt like majesty. Now it felt like excess. The costs rose, the crowds shrank, and the great chandeliers that had witnessed half a century of laughter began to dim. Inside, the carpets faded, the seats creaked, and the scent of fresh popcorn was replaced by the faint dust of time. The Uptown still had its loyal visitors, older couples, nostalgic souls, and true film lovers, but the energy was fading. What had once been an empire of light was now a quiet echo of itself. The 1990s sealed its fate. Regulations demanded accessibility renovations, elevators, new exits, safety upgrades. The cost was enormous, and the theatre's owners couldn't bear it. At the same time, the culture had shifted. People no longer dressed up for cinema. They streamed in and out, snacks in hand, heads down. The theatre had become disposable, and the Uptown, a relic of a slower, grander world. By the decade's end, whispers spread through Toronto. The Uptown might close. Some refused to believe it. Others walked by the darkening marquee and felt a quiet sadness, knowing deep down that a piece of the city's soul was being prepared for its final curtain. In 2003, the inevitable happened. After more than 80 years of laughter, applause, and stories, the Uptown Theatre closed its doors. The marquee went dark, the posters were taken down, and the echo of footsteps that once filled its corridors faded into silence. Toronto had lost not just a theatre, but a piece of its collective heartbeat. For a while, people hoped it might be saved, that a new owner would step in, that the city would recognize what it was about to lose. But progress doesn't wait for sentiment. Developers saw land where history once stood. In December of that year, demolition began. The Uptown didn't go quietly. During the dismantling, tragedy struck. A wall collapsed unexpectedly, killing a construction worker and injuring others. The story that had begun with glamour and grace ended in sorrow and dust. The news spread quickly, and for a moment, Toronto stopped to grieve. Not just for the man who lost his life, but for the building that had given life to generations of memories. When the rubble was cleared, there was nothing left, just a vacant lot where light and laughter had once lived. Commuters walked by, barely glancing at the empty space, unaware that under the asphalt lay the ghosts of 1,000 Saturday nights. Some said it was progress, others called it a tragedy. But everyone who had ever walked beneath its glowing sign felt something missing when they passed Yonge Street, as if the city had quietly erased part of its own reflection. The Uptown's fall wasn't just the end of a building, it was the closing scene of an era when cinema still felt sacred, when community meant gathering in the dark to dream together. And when the last brick fell, Toronto lost more than architecture, it lost a piece of its soul. Time has passed, but the Uptown Theatre still lives quietly in the city's memory. Its physical walls are gone, yet its presence lingers like a song that refuses to fade. Those who once sat beneath its chandeliers still speak of it with a kind of reverence, not for the films they saw, but for how those nights made them feel. For older generations, the Uptown was a portal, a doorway to imagination, to emotion, to the belief that cinema could unite strangers in the dark. For many, it was the first place they fell in love, the first place they cried in public, the first place they saw the world beyond Toronto's skyline. Those experiences left an imprint that no streaming service, no multiplex could ever replicate. Even today, when people walk down Yonge Street, they may not realize it, but they're walking over history. Beneath the ground lies the memory of red velvet seats, of laughter echoing up to the balcony, of a projector flickering through a cloud of cigarette smoke. The ghosts of those moments still exist, not haunting, but reminding. Culturally, the Uptown represented something Canada rarely celebrates: grandeur. It was unapologetically beautiful, built in a time when art and architecture mattered, when public spaces were designed to inspire awe. Its loss wasn't just about economics or modernization, it was about what we choose to keep and what we allow to vanish. In its absence, Toronto became a little quieter, a little more efficient, and perhaps a little less human. But legacy isn't measured in bricks and mortar. It lives in emotion, in nostalgia, in the collective pulse of those who still remember the feeling of being there, when the lights dimmed and the city dreamed together. When the lights of the Uptown Theatre went out for the last time, it wasn't just the end of a building, it was the end of an era and the beginning of a new kind of emptiness. Toronto didn't lose a structure, it lost a mirror. The Uptown's fall was not caused by one decision or one generation. It was the result of a quiet cultural shift, a transformation in how we define beauty, memory, and belonging. The great theatres of the 20th century were born in an age that believed in collective experience. They were cathedrals for ordinary people, places where strangers sat together in silence, breathing the same story. But by the dawn of the new century, something had changed. The world had become faster, smaller, lonelier. Entertainment moved from public halls to private screens, from shared wonder to personal comfort. We stopped dressing up for stories. We stopped waiting in line with strangers. We stopped needing the magic of space to feel connected. The Uptown didn't collapse under the weight of time. It collapsed under the weight of indifference. Its disappearance revealed something about us, that progress often disguises itself as efficiency. We replaced marble with metal, ritual with routine, depth with distraction. The Uptown was never just about film, it was about presence, the act of being somewhere that made you feel part of something greater. And when those doors closed, a silence entered the city that no multiplex could ever fill. The glow that once poured onto Yonge Street is gone, but the longing it created remains. Because deep down, every Canadian who remembers the Uptown knows this truth. We didn't just lose a theatre, we lost the habit of wonder. If you remember walking past its bright marquee, or sitting in the dark as the screen came alive, share your memory below. Tell this story again, keep it alive, because remembering is how we protect what's worth loving. And if you believe stories like this should never be forgotten, subscribe. More untold chapters of Canada's past are coming, stories of beauty, loss, and identity that deserve to live again. Let's keep the light on together.